Hi, this is Maury Moreland Morrison, here to tell you Geico has more than just great savings. Much more. Geico's been around for more than 75 years, back when they were using Morse code. Sorry, that's just my sense of humor. What's more, with Geico you get 24/7 access to licensed agents on the app, online, or over the phone, so you can talk to them at night or in the morning. So forevermore, just know that no other auto insurer has more than Geico. More power to you. Geico. Expect great savings and a whole lot more.
Blog Talk Radio. Welcome to Within the Chaos with your host,
Rodney Shortridge,
and co-host,
Robin Dalton.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight. You can listen in by going to blogtalk.com/Within the Chaos, or listen in by phone by dialing 323-870-4197. You can also call in to ask any questions to our guests at the same number at 323-870-4197. For deep within the heart of the Appalachian Mountains, it's freaking cold again tonight. I'd like to welcome everyone and thank you all for listening to Within the Chaos. My name is Hot Rod Rodney Shortridge, and I'll be your host tonight, along with my fiery redhead co-host, Robin Dalton.
Hey, y'all.
I was beginning to wonder if I had a co-host. Tonight, our special guest is Stephen Myers. Stephen is the author of 2 books. His first book is titled Lost Technologies of the Great Pyramid. His second book is The Great Pyramid Prosperity Machine. He's an author, lecturer, and independent researcher. He studied the Great Pyramid for over 20 years. for over 20 years to understand how the ancient wonder of the world was built and why. His research includes traveling to Egypt to conduct extensive on-site research at the Gaza Plateau, or Giza. I don't know why I said Gaza. I'm thinking of the Middle East. Stephen has written numerous magazine articles and given many lectures on the subject of the Great Pyramid, compiling his research into 2 books which provide a comprehensive and detailed explanation of how the Great Pyramid was built and why. He is also founder of a nonprofit foundation dedicated to the understanding on how and why the Great Pyramid was built. The mission of this foundation is to redevelop these ancient but advanced technologies to help our modern but troubled world. The foundation's website is www.thepump.org. Okay, so Robin, how was your week been?
Oh, as usual, freaking exhausting because all I do is work. But other than that, recovering from this nasty flu that we keep passing around here at the house and at work, I'm all right.
Yeah, y'all got to keep that nasty critter away from me.
Mm-hmm.
This is the first time in I bet 4 years I ain't been sick, and I'm enjoying it. And I don't need nobody to be giving it to me. I'm gonna put myself in a bubble.
Well, we have like 3 people out at work right now with the flu and strep, and then Shanna, she's sick, and I guess we're just passing it back and forth.
Wow.
But I will survive if I ever get a day off.
Hang on just a second. You go ahead and talk to everybody for a second. I think Stephen's having a problem. Let me go see if I can figure it out.
No. I will try to keep our listeners busy, our whole 1 or 2 of them. So I'll give everybody an update on Black Diamond. It is the beginning of the new year, as y'all know, and we're going to start our investigations. We have one coming up next weekend and one in March. So, again, if there's anybody out there that has somewhere you'd like for us to check out or get some information for you, just give us a call. Our number can be found on our website, or you can shoot me or Rod an email or a message on Facebook. There's plenty of ways to get a hold of us. Hopefully here soon we'll have a update on all the events we're going to be attending this year. So, again, if y'all have any ideas on events that you think that we should come and check out, hit us up and let us know. We're always up for some new ideas.
Yeah, he's having trouble calling in, so let's see. He's trying to call right now. There he is. We got him. Let me go ahead and introduce him again. It's my honor to welcome our special guest, Stephen Myers. That thank goodness the phone number works. Hey, Stephen, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing great. I'm glad to be on your show.
We're glad to have you. I'm excited.
Oh, yeah, it's going to be a great show. It's going to be a really good learning experience, especially for me.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so can you tell everyone a little bit about yourself and what made you decide to start researching the Great Pyramid?
Well, I'm just a regular guy, believe it or not, but I'm the author of 2 books about the Great Pyramid. Lost Technologies of the Great Pyramid is the title of my first book, and the second book is The Great Pyramid Prosperity Machine. And what got me started was I've always been interested in technology and that type of thing. A lot of experience in electronics and fluid dynamics and history. I like history. So when I studied like World War II, instead of generals and that type of thing, I'm not interested in the people as much, but I was interested in the battleships and the airplanes and the the distance an airplane could fly and that type of thing. So I've always enjoyed technology. I have a collection of old antique gasoline engines and that type of thing. And if a person likes history and technology, ultimately their focus will be on the Great Pyramid because it is from distant antiquity, but it is also a structure that screams of high technology.
Mm-hmm. Well, would the Great Pyramid, would it be considered a megalithic structure? And, for the people that don't understand or know what a megalithic structure is, can you explain that to them?
Well, I would think so. Megalithic structures are structures that are made out of big components, if you will, components of megalithic size. And I would say you could call it that. Most of the stones are about 2.5 tons, and the casing stones, the precision cut stones that were covering the Great Pyramid were in the 16-ton range, and then some of the stones in the interior weigh as much as 70 tons, which is quite a bit. So, yeah, it would be a megalithic structure, to be sure.
So how old is the Great Pyramid, and I guess the other pyramids that are surrounding it? Have you studied those also, or are you just focused on the Great Pyramid?
Well, certainly all pyramids, both new and old, are interesting, to say the least, to me anyway. But I do focus on how the Great Pyramid was assembled and why it was assembled. So the believe it or not, the age of the Great Pyramid is actually beyond the focus of my research. And I know other researchers that spend a great deal of time and effort understanding or determining what the age of the Great Pyramid is, but I don't. And there's a reason for that. Let's say we determined that the age of the Great Pyramid was 10,000 years old, okay? And that was determined, and it was, accepted as fact. Well, what does that really tell us? It doesn't really tell us anything. It doesn't tell us how it was built. It doesn't tell us how the stones were moved or why the people went to the effort to move them. So I don't spend the time that other researchers do on the age of the Great Pyramid.
Well, then I guess the next question would be, well, how was it built?
Excellent question. My first book is the answer to that question, believe it or not. A lot of people think that the ancient builders had very strong back muscles and were able to drag the stones up of this great big giant ramp type of thing. And that's the traditional view of Egyptologists. But it's fascinating that Egyptology has never moved even a medium-sized stone up a ramp in that manner, or up a, let's say, a dirt road that's on an incline. Egyptology has never moved, let's say, a 16-ton payload 1 inch in the manner that they say it was done. And to move stones on a production line level, production line rate, by dragging these stones that are beyond the scope of being dragged, is not possible. So, but I think that they used water locks similar to those in the Erie Canal on the East Coast, or the Panama Canal down in Panama. These water locks, I think, started from the Nile River and went up a series of water locks right up to the building site. And imagine, if you will, the first stones that were set in place was the first layer of casing stones that were on the outside of the Great Pyramid. Those stones are cemented together watertight. The few that remain are cemented together watertight. And then imagine, if you will, that those stones, the area inside those stones, that square wall of stones, was filled with water. So stones on barges could move from the Nile River all the way up those water locks, up into that pond impounded by the first layer of casing stones, and then those interior stones for the first layer could be taken off of barges and set right into the pond. And when that pond became filled with stones, then the first layer of the Great Pyramid would be completed. And that similar process would continue layer after layer, and building the Great Pyramid like that, level by level, and ultimately all the way to the top. Our website has a video series that shows that process in great detail with the barges and the stones and how they were placed. And that video series is at our website, which is thepump.org. So people can find out more about it by visiting our website.
Was that the main the main role that the Nile River played in the construction of the Great Pyramid?
The main role that the water locks, yes, the water locks' purpose was to move the massive stones from the Nile up to the building site, and then ultimately set those stones in place.
Okay.
The use of water locks, and barges was how we think the builders moved the massive amount of heavy stones. In the modern world, in the 21st century, water locks are the system of choice that modern mankind uses to move our heaviest objects, like oil tankers and that type of thing. In fact, the Panama Canal is being expanded right now to use bigger water locks. So I also think that in ancient times, the builders moved their heaviest objects using the same efficient method.
Well, what was the true purpose of the Great Pyramid and the surrounding pyramids?
Well, again, my focus is specifically on how a particular construction project was assembled and used, and that would be the Great Pyramid. I don't think every pyramid had the same purpose. There's a pyramid in San Francisco, a big, tall Transamerica building that's shaped like a pyramid. So, and there's a pyramid at the Louvre, pyramid in Las Vegas. So there's a lot of pyramids, but I'm not saying that they all have the same purpose. But I think that the Great Pyramid was built to serve a specific purpose, and that purpose is to make empty stomachs full. It turned poverty into prosperity. It was used to create wealth. It wasn't built at a huge cost, but it was built as a wise investment. And it was able to turn the desert into a garden. And it did all of those things, plus more, because the Great Pyramid was built to be a functioning machine. And that machine was infrastructure for the civilization that built it. So the Great Pyramid had a return on investment. It wasn't just built to be a static device, but it was a functioning machine that was used to pump water.
Pump water.
Pump water.
That's an awful big pump. I mean, how much water would something like that be pumping? Amount of water? Wow, I don't even know how to ask the question because it's just that massive scale to pump that much water.
Correct. It pumped a lot of water. We think that the output of the Great Pyramid water pump was through the King's Chamber vents, and it would pump water. Let's say the vents are about 8 inches square, so it would be like two very large, massive fire hoses, if you will, pumping water 24 hours a day. but it pumped a lot of water. And there's a lot of water pumps out there in this world that are bigger than the Great Pyramid. In Washington State, they have this dam called the Grand Coulee Dam, and it makes a lot of electricity, but it also is used to pump water for irrigation up higher than the height of the dam. And it irrigates much of much of central Washington. And we've eaten apples, fruits, and that type of thing, vegetables that have been irrigated with pumped water from the Grand Coulee Dam. So yeah, it's a big water pump, the Great Pyramid, and that water was used to power heavy machinery. It was used certainly for irrigation, and used for other purposes as well.
So did they have electricity in that time period?
Certainly. Several artifacts from ancient Egypt indicate that they did. There's some little figurines that are electroplated with gold. They're not solid gold. They have a gold covering that was put on. That's very thin, but it is electroplated. But they also have the Baghdad Battery. I'm sure you've heard of that. Those are these little jars, about 8 inches, masonry jars that have a iron rod that goes in the center and like a copper tube. And if you fill it with like grape juice, you can get around a half a volt from these batteries. And there's scads of them, hundreds and hundreds of these artifacts. So yes, they had electricity. And they had, I think they had a lot of high technology. Certainly they had a technology for cutting stone on a large scale, but also very precise. So the casing stones are made to within about 1/50th of an inch over a surface of 4 by 7 feet. So that's about the thickness of a fingernail. So yeah, they have had a lot of high technology, I'm sure.
Now the people that built the pyramids are not the people we know as the Egyptians and the pharaohs, right? These were people before them.
Well, I'm glad that you asked me that, because who built the Great Pyramid, just like when it was built, is not a focus of my research. You know, for example, let's say we found out that it was a guy named Bob. Bob built the Great Pyramid. You know, he was the leader and everything. Well, if we find out who built the Great Pyramid, you know, what does that really tell us? Not a lot. What's important is, well, why did they do it? How did they do it? How did they move these massive stones on a production line basis? I mean, so I don't focus on who, like if it was, a pharaoh, or if the Great Pyramid was built pre-biblical flood or before the Ice Age or after. I just am interested in certainly the technology to the Great Pyramid structure. So I can't help you on who built it.
That's all right. Well, it kind of goes. I don't mean to jump on you on this, because I know where you said this is not your area, but maybe I don't know. Maybe you can give us a little insight to the Sphinx. Does it have anything to do with the Great Pyramid? Because from what I've understand, with a lot of researchers saying that it's actually older than the pyramid, the Great Pyramid itself, because of the erosion where that it shows on the Sphinx. I mean, does that play into any of your research at all?
The Sphinx is right by the Great Pyramid, and it is essentially a sculpture. You know, it's carved out of rock, but and the date of the construction of the Sphinx, when it was made, is certainly under scholarly debate. But no, it's It's not a focus of my research. It really isn't. But it's a wonder of the world. I saw the Sphinx over there, of course, and it's amazing. If anyone gets a chance to go over to Egypt, I certainly suggest that they do, just to see these marvelous things.
Well, do you have any idea how long it took to build the Great Pyramid?
Most people say the Egyptologists say like 20, 23 years to build. But it's interesting to me that Egyptology is a science, okay? But for some reason, it doesn't engage in the scientific method. In other words, Egyptologists say it took like 23 years, but the science of Egyptology has existed for about 200 years, and they've never made one casing stone.
Oh.
And Egyptology has never moved a 16-ton payload 1 inch. Egyptology has never made the surface of one casing stone yet. They've never done it. Egyptology has never moved a heavy stone around the corner of a spiral ramp. Isn't that interesting? Here it is, a science, but they've never done that. And the largest stones, they've never moved a payload, which is 70 tons, 1 inch yet. But they know how long it took to do the whole thing. They know that casing stones were made all day long. You know, there were people that made them all day long. But all of Egyptology can't make a single casing stone. And I think that's very interesting. So what I'm getting at is how long it took is certainly under scholarly debate. Some people say several hundred years, but I like to say it was very short, like maybe 8 years, let's say, because they could move stones in a production line manner 24 hours a day. They didn't have to just do it through daytime, because water locks, they work 24 hours a day, and you know, move the stones through the canal and through the water lock, and it's actually a very rapid system to move payloads. That's why it's the system of choice in the 21st century. So I would say about 8 years or so.
So where were these stones quarried from? I mean, were they close by, or were they, you know, a few miles away or hundreds of miles away?
Yeah. A lot of the fine limestone that the casing stones that I've been talking about, the outside stones, the quarries for them are across the river. So everyone agrees that the stones were transported to across the river on barges. Everyone agrees with that. You know, 100% of everybody. But okay. I think the builders were geniuses, smart enough to understand how water locks work, and kept the stones on barges and took them all the way up to the building site effortlessly. So that's where the casing stones were located or quarried across the river. Now the largest stones, some of them came from quarries 400 miles away. 70 tons.
Wow.
Moved 400 miles upstream, which on the map is down, and everyone agrees they were moved on barges. You can put a 70-ton payload on a barge. The Erie Canal was built in the 1830s, and it was 4.5 feet deep, and the barges had a capacity of 70 tons. And little children worked on the Erie Canal, you know, way back before the Civil War, and 2 horses could move a barge that had a 70-ton payload, so it's very efficient. Each horse is 1 horsepower is 750 watts, so you can move 70 tons with 1,500 watts. So that's 15 100-watt light bulbs is the energy that it's needed to move 70 tons using barges, buoyancy of water, and water locks. But anyway, yeah, so they were able to move those 70-ton payloads easily and quickly up these water locks into the building site, right into the pond, if you will, in the building site, and then move, built the Great Pyramid level by level. And the procedure for that, again, is at our website, a video series at thepump.org.
That's fascinating. I don't mean to jump back to the stones, but is all the stones limestone? Because that's a pretty hard stone.
Most of them are.
Yeah.
There's limestone and some granite, which is even harder. The high-quality limestone was cut to perfection and used for casing stones on the outside, and those stones are cemented together watertight. And then the poorer quality limestone was used for the 2.5-ton majority of the Great Pyramid was used or made of 2.5-ton stones, but the largest stones are granite, and the coffer in the King's Chamber is also granite, and some other various stones. So yes, they had different types of stone, excellent stone cutting ability, which cannot be done by hand. You can't make that much precision using hand tools. So when you read a book that Egyptologists write showing how they used hammers and chisels to do the fine stonework, then you know that you found an error in their book, because it can't be done.
Well, that was kind of going into my next question, is how were they able to cut the stone so precise with a hammer and chisel? Surely to gosh, with that kind of hard rock, a stone, you would need something that would be harder, which I guess everybody knows it's diamonds or lasers.
Yes. Yeah. Certainly when you're told that they used hand tools to make the precision stonework, that's essentially junk science. That's just a story that Egyptologists made up, and then they just tell. I mean, they don't really demonstrate it. It's a hypothesis that they have. But for a science to stop at a hypothesis without any type of demonstrative proof, like a demonstration, then it's odd. In fact, it's disingenuous to present a hypothesis as fact. So Egyptology is kind of in a crossroads right now, because a lot of people just don't believe it anymore. I know very few people that believe the things that Egyptology teaches in college right now about moving heavy stones with your back, or precision stone cutting, and that just can't be done. So it's a mystery. We don't have any of the whatever machines that they used to do the stone cutting, but we do have the results of those machines, and we know that it wasn't done by hand. So people that understand that the stone cutting, the precision stone cutting, cannot be done by hand are essentially ahead of the entire science of Egyptology, because they haven't figured it out yet.
Well, I'm trying to run this through my head. Exactly how much water would it have taken to build and move such large stones?
A good rule of thumb is about 8 times the weight of the barge and stone, let's say, because the water weighs more than the barge displaces. That's why something floats, like battleships or whatever. Battleships are heavy, but they weigh less than the amount of water that they take up or displace. So it takes about 8 times the weight of water to lift a stone. But that's okay, because the Great Pyramid was a water pump, and it pumped water to supply the water for the water locks.
Okay.
During the first thing that was done, one of the first things, was they cut the passages and chamber beneath where the Great Pyramid was to be built. They cut those passages and chambers in the solid rock, and that acted like a water pump. And they used that pumped water, the pond full, and to supply water for the water locks. And the Great Pyramid was built effortlessly because it had to be. Because you can't do it by strong back muscles. It can't be done that way. So they use this entire system to build the Great Pyramid.
Rod?
Are you there? Yeah.
I'm here.
Well, I thought you was going to ask the next one. That's all right. So what you was talking about the barges. So what kind of barges did they have at that time, and how large would these barges have to be able to move these stones? And I guess the next to add to it is how many stones could they put on the barge at a time?
Excellent questions. Certainly there are some hieroglyphs showing large barges in Egypt, hieroglyphs that had obelisks on them. There's a very famous hieroglyph that shows a barge with, in fact, 2 obelisks on it at the same time. But they had large barges to move the stones of the Great Pyramid. Yet there is no evidence at all for the barges that were used specifically for the Great Pyramid. There's no hieroglyphs. There's no remaining evidence. There's no drawings. There's no wooden barges. So their exact design is under debate. They could have even been modular. The heavier stones could have had several barges on them, if you will, underneath it, like long ways, if you will, with the stone for more buoyancy. And then smaller stones, a barge could have held, let's say, 2 or 3, which is, not very many. But they're different sizes, different applications for different size barges and different sized for different size stones. So it's not a formidable task to move stones on barges, if I may say so.
Okay. So what's the process on the barges moving the stones and to the pyramid and to place it on for the side or for the walls or the exterior?
Okay,
of the
excellent.
pyramid?
That's a super good question. Our video series at our website at thepump.org shows that very specific task. Let's say a barge has a casing stone on it, and it goes through the water locks and then into that pond I was talking about that's impounded by the casing stones. So you have a barge with a big heavy stone on it, too heavy to lift, too heavy to really move by hand. Well, imagine that the barge is rather narrow, and the stone, the precision cut stone, hangs over the barge on both sides. Well, if you move the barge between, let's say, two stones in the middle of the pond, if you will, and then you add water to the barge, it'll make the barge lower down, and then the casing stone will rest on these two supports, if you will. And then you move the barge out of the way that had some water in it that lowered down. You move that barge out of the way. So within minutes, you could have taken that stone off of the barge. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, then you got a casing stone, 16-ton casing stone that's on these two supports. Can't move it by hand. No one can do it. Egyptologists can't do it. The largest stone that most Egyptologists will ever move is their kidney stone. That's a joke. But anyway, just letting you know. But so you got this 16-ton stone supported by these supports. So you bring a specialized barge in, that's like a forklift, and it comes in low because it has water in it. All right, and then it kind of catches on the back end of the casing stone, and then it is held onto the barge with ropes. It's specialized barge. Our video series that depicts this process, and then you siphon the water out of the barge, the specialized barge, and then it'll lift up and lift the casing stone up. It just takes minutes to do that. So you got a barge with a casing stone hanging out kind of on one end, similar to like a forklift, if you will. Then the pond is only waist deep because the Great Pyramid is built level by level. So they move the barge over to where the casing stone is supposed to go, which is on top of the casing stone wall, on the level they're working on. They apply the bonding agent to the area where this casing stone is going to go, and then they add water to the barge, and then the casing stone gently sets down into place. And that's how we think it was done. And I can't think of another way that it could actually be done. And this would be like a production line, if you will, of stones coming, and people would do this process, all day long, and it would be highly mechanized and efficient and doable. Using buoyancy of water is powerful, it's controllable, and it is efficient, and it's available. So that's how the stones were moved and set in place, instead of just the builders being knuckle draggers with strong backs and pulling the stones up a ramp. So, but again, our video series has a lot of computer-generated animation showing the entire process step by step.
Cool. Well, my next question would be, as they're going up in the levels of the pyramid, eventually it's starting to get smaller and smaller. How were they able to move the stones up higher as they went along? Because would they come to a point where they wouldn't be able to have the pond as you're describing, I don't know, get the last few feet, 100 feet or whatever?
You are correct. This process, that pond, let's call it the construction pond, as the pyramid got taller, rose to the sky, it would get smaller and smaller. Well, how fascinating it is that on the top levels, the stones become much smaller and require smaller barges, and in fact small enough that there can be some handwork, if you will. In other words, they could lever them or push them a little bit. In the Middle Ages, people used to climb to the top of the Great Pyramid and push stones off the top. So they were able to move them. They weren't the huge stones, but they were smaller at the very top. But also the video series addresses that issue. We think that they made a temporary enclosure out of wood, kind of like a big square tank, if you will, and that enclosure allowed the pond to keep from getting smaller and smaller, and still allowed water locks to go up and finish towards the top. And then it also, our video series shows how the heavier capstone was set in place. So I hope people watch that. It's about 14 short videos, and the link is on our website, and then they can check that out. And there's certainly information in both of my books about the Great Pyramid's construction, which are much more detailed than a few short videos. And so that's what we're doing.
So, how were the builders able to place the capstone, and what was the capstone made out of?
Well, those are excellent questions. The capstone of the Great Pyramid, there's no evidence that it did exist or did not exist. So, there's no physical evidence. And to make a claim of what the capstone was made out of, some people say it was a giant crystal from Atlantis, or that it was electrum, or gold or silver, or brass, bronze, or whatever you want, or stone, or meteorite. People make claims, but there's no evidence to back it up. So I don't say that there was or wasn't a capstone. Some people, believe it or not, for religious purposes, claim that there was never a capstone because it would be the stone that was rejected, which is like in terms of biblical stuff. But the capstone, again, I have a video specifically for the capstone, and it went up those water locks all the way to the top. And then they had specialized barges to be able to set that right on the very top of the Great Pyramid. So I hope people, again, view that video, which is free, and depicts the process in detail. So that would help them. But it's just like the capstone would be just like another stone of the Great Pyramid. Only, some people think it's significant, but it was, if they had one, set right on the top using the buoyancy of water, specialized barges, and it was very simple.
Well, how did the barges move back to the quarries after they unloaded the stones?
Super good question. Some have suggested that normally water locks are set in pairs. So ships, like in the Panama Canal, ships can go both directions. They can go up the series of water locks in one set, and then right beside it is another series of water locks where stones can come, or ships can come back down. And that's normally the case, even in the Erie Canal. Pairs of water locks side by side. But we think that that was unnecessary. It would be too complex and not an efficient method to accomplish moving the barges back down. We think the barges were moved over the wall for the enclosure pond, that construction pond, and then they were just slid down the side of the Great Pyramid into a pond that existed at the very bottom of the Great Pyramid. Egyptologists acknowledged that there was a wall around the Great Pyramid, And we think that wall's purpose was to impound water so they could just move these barges over the side and then have a rope attached to them and then just slide them down the side of the Great Pyramid, and then they would return back down to the Nile to get another stone. So it would be fast and efficient and consistent with the direct physical evidence. So that's how the barges got back down to receive another stone.
Wow. So,
Dang.
how could we... I'm sorry, go ahead, Rod.
Well, my next question is, in your opinion, you know, with this advanced type of technology, what, in your opinion, what do you think happened that caused them to lose these building techniques and these types of technologies?
Well, I'm a catastrophist, which is a person that doesn't believe that history is a very gradual process, you know, that we started out as monkeys and gradually became an agrarian society, and then we gradually had an industrial revolution and got to where we are now. I believe that history has been punctuated by catastrophes in distant past. And that catastrophe had the last catastrophe, whatever you want to call it, either the biblical flood or an ice age or whatever it was, disrupted civilization. And when a civilization is disrupted, what is gone the first is the highest technology. So the high technology of stone cutting and of the operation of the Great Pyramid water pump was lost. You know, I couldn't imagine if we, in our civilization, let's say, it could be anything. It could be like a disease, or for some reason the power grid goes out and we don't have power. You know, our phones don't work. It would be a catastrophe. You know, we'd run out of gas, a lean, and we would be back to the Stone Age. So probably just a select group of artisans and technicians were the operators of the stone cutting equipment and the people that maintained the Great Pyramid water pump and other high technology. And when society broke down for whatever reason, all of that information and knowledge and expertise was lost. So there's lots of examples of ancient high technology that's not fully understood in modern times.
So what did the ancient builders use to bond these stones together?
They used a bonding agent whose composition is under scholarly debate. Some people, like Egyptologists, say, oh, that stuff between the stones, that was mortar or plaster. And they put it on there, and then when they stacked one stone on top of the other, they could slide better. That's their story. But plaster, if you get plaster wet again, you know, like plasterboard or whatever, it can start to dissolve, you know, and that's not a characteristic of the bonding agent between the stones of the casing stones of the Great Pyramid. It is remarkable high technology, and that if it could be replicated would be very valuable. The bonding agent used between the casing stones is renowned for being stronger than the stone itself. So cement gets actually quite brittle, concrete, if you will, gets quite brittle after several hundred years. Let me put it that way. But this is not brittle. It's very strong, but its composition, again, is not, some people say they know what it is, but it's certainly not being reproduced these days because actually no one is exactly sure what it's made out of.
So, in your opinion, how many workers do you think it took to build the Great Pyramid?
Well, I think it was, I would say, around 500 workers at the building site. There wouldn't be any need for any more. There would be people maybe a little more, depending on how you want to figure it. If you want to count the cooks and the supply people and everything else, the carpenters. So it would be a workforce of the people moving the stones that were on the specialized barges and on the water locks, around 500. But then there would be some periphery people. I also believe that the construction continued 24 hours a day, so it was quite rapid, to say the least.
Now, were they compensated for their labor? I mean, do you think they had, like, typical work weeks and shifts and all that?
I do. Certainly there's no way to determine that conclusively, but I think that I think that they were very well paid. It's just the nature of major construction projects. The people that made the workers that worked on the Empire State Building were paid comparatively, compared to other jobs, quite well. And that's true of the people that built the dams in the Pacific Northwest, the hydroelectric dams. Although they only got paid 50 cents an hour, that was higher than anything else you could get for a working man. People would come from all over the nation to work on the dams because it was such high pay. You know, with 50 cents an hour back then, you would go buy a home and everything else. So,
wow.
Yes, I think that they were well paid, and I also think that they were not worked hard. You know, they were operating the doors on pivots of water locks, and they were operating barges in various fashions. They literally could not be working hard, because working hard is impossible to move those payloads of those size. So they were just like operators of equipment and stuff, and I'm sure they got paid quite well. And I believe that they were also fed as part of their pay, if you will. They were fed well, like logging camps in the Pacific Northwest are known for feeding their workers very well. So I think it was a good gig to work on the Great Pyramid. It wasn't backbreaking labor at all.
Well, you would think it was, wouldn't you?
Well, this is a question I've been wondering, I guess, ever since I, grew up and seen pictures of the pyramid. Why a pyramid shape when they constructed it?
Pyramid shape has a very important purpose. Like I said, this pond is impounded by these four walls. It's kind of like four dams holding back water that are all back to back, if you will. All kind of back to back, and then there's water in the middle. So it's similar to that. So if you look at a lot of dams, there are the straight dams, not the curved ones. They have a face on them that's slanted, if you will. And that's if you ever get a chance to be around a big, flat, straight dam, the spillway or the face is very reminiscent of a side of the Great Pyramid, if you will. Grand Coulee Dam is that way. The Hoover Dam is not that way because it's curved. So it's a way to be strong to hold back the water that these four sides impound.
how and why was this particular site chosen to build the Great Pyramid?
Okay. I believe that that site was chosen for technical purposes. One is that it is excellent bedrock that the Great Pyramid is built on. It's not built on sand. There is no settling or anything like that. Also, there was a yardang, or a rock outcropping, that the Great Pyramid is built over. It's built over a mound, if you will, of solid rock. The Sphinx was carved out of that type of a mound, if you will. And they use that mound to excavate a passage all the way down through the mound into the subterranean chamber 100 feet below the surface of the bedrock. And that was part of the construction pump. It was a kind of a technical necessity that I elaborate on in great detail in my book. So that's why they chose that very specific site. And to this day, the Great Pyramid doesn't have any architectural damage except for from the hands of man.
Well, wouldn't the height and weight of the water case cause any problems with the moving of the stones the higher they built up?
No. The reason why there's a lot of force in the pond, if you will, because the water goes between the cracks of the interior stones, the rough-cut interior stones, all the way down to bedrock. So the hydrostatic force against these four walls, if you will, is tremendous. But the way the Great Pyramid was built, the casing stones, which were massive, bigger than the interior stones, were incorporated into the interior of the Great Pyramid. So the walls weren't just the casing stones that are like sheathing on the construction site. The walls weren't like plywood, if you will, but the casing stones were incorporated into the interior stones. They were like set on top of each other. So the casing stones are actually as much a seal as they are a wall. Also, the four walls of the casing stone actually are divided in two from the apex, from the capstone down to the bedrock. So each side kind of bends in a little bit, similar to some hydroelectric dams. And what that does is the hydrostatic force of the water inside the Great Pyramid pushes on the stones, so they're pushed in compression, which makes it a lot stronger. So that unusual feature of the Great Pyramid having 8 sides has a purpose, a functional purpose, and that is to help make the sides of the Great Pyramid stronger.
Well, is there any evidence of any mass construction failures or deaths during the building of the pyramid?
None that I know of. Certainly, I'm sure that they may have had some casualties. That was before the OSHA or whatever. But I don't know of any any casualty of any worker. There's certainly no evidence of it. There is supposedly worker camps near the Great Pyramid on the Giza Plateau, but it's difficult to really ascertain. And there's some worker graves, but it's difficult to ascertain which pyramid they worked on or what they actually did. So,
right.
As for a casualty or somebody getting crushed or whatever, that's unknown in modern times.
Well, is there anything mysterious about the Great Pyramid that science hasn't answered yet?
Oh, certainly. the Great Pyramid is fascinating in a lot of ways. Recently, there's been numbers of scans. People have used some high-tech scanning devices of various types to scan the Great Pyramid, and they always find some anomaly and come up with fuzzy pictures, colored pictures that don't really show anything, kind of. So, but it's too bad that that's generally all that we get. They think that there's maybe some extra passages, but they're inaccessible. You know what I mean? Or they are some voids between stones, but the exact nature of them or purpose or even what they look like is never comes to light. So there's a lot of mystery there, but pretty much everything about the Great Pyramid is certainly under debate in terms of who built it, why, and there's everyone has their different story, and it's up to the independent researcher or the curious minds to weed through all of these explanations of the same direct physical evidence that everyone has, and to see what makes the most sense. That's one thing I like about your show. It's Within the Chaos. I really like that title because the Great Pyramid is within a chaos of confusing explanations that are contradictory to one another. Some people base their research on passages that have not yet been discovered, or they base their research on competing scans. One scan somebody has, and then another scan somebody else has, and they make an elaborate explanation of why the Great Pyramid exists. So it's too bad. So, but ultimately, I know that the Great Pyramid reveals its secrets very slowly. But I think, I think we're entering a new age where people aren't accepting the same old stories. It's a genesis of understanding. People don't just accept, precision stone cutting was done by hand, but you can't show us. The expert Egyptologist can't do it. People don't like that anymore. Right. People are offended by being told that, or people being told, they just drug those stones up a ramp, but without any handling scars. They're still pristine. So that people understand that there's a more explanation to it. That they have to dig deeper than just believe the stories that Egyptologists have been telling for hundreds of years.
Right. So what was it like for you to see the Great Pyramid for the first time?
Oh, it was awesome. It was amazing. I would suggest, if people are interested in that type of thing, to spend the money and go there, because the people of Egypt are friendly. They've been taking care of tourists for 4,000 years, and they're friendly people. I think it's safe. So safer than Chicago by any means. And it's a wonderful place. But you see the pyramid, and it's beyond human scale. Like a hydroelectric dam is made out of concrete, but it was wet concrete. So the components actually molecules of concrete, okay? But the builders of the Great Pyramid use components that are ultra massive. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's like I can't even describe what it's like. It's like having a pencil made out of a redwood, the entire tree, and you stick a pencil lead in it. That's just out of scale. And the pyramid is big, certainly, but the components are big too. And you stand next to one of those things and you think, man, if you put one of them in the back of my pickup, one stone, it would destroy my pickup.
Yeah.
I got a half-ton
Wow.
pickup, and a 2.5-ton stone wouldn't be very good on my pickup.
No.
You see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
It's incomprehensible in a way. But you think about it back before the Civil War. That's a long time ago. On the Erie Canal, they went to all the effort to make that canal with the water and the water locks and everything, 4.5 feet deep, and it could move 70-ton payloads. So you think, wow, it's just amazing. And it's so interesting. Not just the pyramids, which is what I focus on, but the ancient writing, the ancient medicine that they had. They did C-sections back then. They had birth control. A lot of things. So it's all kinds of high technology that much has been lost, but hopefully discoveries are just around the corner. I'm so interested in it that I started a nonprofit foundation called the Pharaoh's Pump Foundation, and our website is at thepump.org. I hope people drop by our website, find out what we're about, how we're funded, what our goals are, mission statement, that type of thing, and they can certainly contact us. And if they have a question, if they want to become involved, and that type of thing. So hopefully they can do that.
Oh yeah, I hope they do too, because it's fascinating. So what is your opinion about the pyramids throughout the world? Did other cultures use this same type of building technology for their pyramids?
I've looked into that, and my opinion is that the Great Pyramid itself is the only pyramid that was built to be a water pump. So it's unique in the world.
Mm. So is there any evidence of any water residue within or on the outside of the Great Pyramid?
Excellent question. Yes, we could spend the whole rest of the night talking about water on the Giza Plateau. Certainly there's water erosion on the Sphinx. Everyone is familiar with that. But the Sphinx is lower in elevation than the Great Pyramid. So we think that some of the water from the Great Pyramid may have contributed to the erosion of the Sphinx and the Sphinx enclosure. But inside the Great Pyramid was found what Sir Flanders Petrie, an early Egyptologist, he found what he called Nile earth inside the Great Pyramid, which is sediment. And Herodotus, the 5th century BC historian, described the Great Pyramid as being like an island surrounded by water. And we think that back in the 5th century BC, that wall around the Great Pyramid still existed, and possibly even water was still in that enclosure. So if there was water around the Great Pyramid, it would be kind of like the Great Pyramid was an island surrounded by water. He also described the Great Pyramid as having an artificial duct, a pipe or something hooked to it. So that could have been either the output or input of the Great Pyramid water pump. And there's a whole host of things that indicate the profound link between water and the Great Pyramid, including the necessity for the stones inside the chambers, as well as the casing stones, to be cemented together watertight.
Another question is, why is the numeric value of 144,000? Why is that such a key role in the building process of the pyramid?
Okay, there's people that say there were 144,000 casing stones that covered the Great Pyramid, and those casing stones were removed around the year 1000 after there was an earthquake in the area, and they used the Great Pyramid as a quarry and quarried off that fine stone to reuse to build Cairo. And that's a matter of history. But modern people, let's say in the last 500 years, have no idea how many casing stones there were on the Great Pyramid. They would just come up with that number because that number is also found in the Bible. So, people come up with things, if you will, but oftentimes evidence to support their ideas is lacking.
All right.
Okay. Well, is it true that the Great Pyramid is the only pyramid in Egypt with both a descending and ascending inner passage? And if so, why?
I think that is correct. Some of the other pyramids have like a chamber right at the base level, if you will, and some of them also have passages that go below the Great Pyramid. And but the Great Pyramid does have the most complex interior, both below and also within the structure of the pyramid itself, with the Grand Gallery, Queen's Chamber, and King's Chamber with associated passages. And the Great Pyramid also has the only pyramid with vents that go from both the Queen's and King's Chamber out. Each of those chambers have these vents that go out of the pyramid. So I think the reason is that the Great Pyramid, with its highest level of craftsmanship and quality of construction, was a functioning machine. And a lot of these other pyramids have had other purposes. And some may have been for copies or for like cargo cults, if you will, and made for ceremonial purposes. And with being ceremonial, you don't have to have the quality of the construction necessary for a functioning machine. I'll give you a really good example. During World War II, out in the Pacific, there was what emerged was cargo cults, and they were indigenous people that came to worship the soldiers and their high technology, like airplanes and canned food and radios and that type of thing. Well, they duplicated those things. The indigenous people made airplanes, except they didn't fly. They were made out of palm leaves and branches and that type of thing. They didn't need to be of high quality construction because they were used for ceremonial purposes. Now imagine, let's say the Great Pyramid existed before Egypt and its pharaohs, okay? It was just there. It existed long before. Well, the pharaoh comes up and he's a leader, and what do leaders do? They take credit for anything. The leader might have said, "You see that big pyramid over there? That's mine. I own it. I'm responsible for it." So then what's the next leader going to do? He's going to say, "Well, I want a pyramid too." That's the way leaders and powerful people do things. And they would build one, not knowing the first one was a water pump. And they would say, "Well, we'll copy it, and then the next leader or pharaoh, he can have a pyramid and use it for whatever purposes they want." So it's hard to say what the other pyramids are for. It's hard to say if they were built within 1,000 years of each other. I wouldn't even make that assumption. Like the pyramids right next to the Great Pyramid may have been built much later than the Great Pyramid. So it's, like I say, it's hard to say, but I don't think any of the other pyramids were built to be water pumps. They may have had other technical purposes, but I don't think they were water pumps.
Well, is it true that the Great Pyramid is a line true north? And, if so, how was it possible for the ancients to be able to do that?
They were highly skilled, and they were able to use probably some technical device, be it a precision compass and or whatever, and built the Great Pyramid so it aligns with the North and South Pole, if you will. But I don't know what significance you would give that. My home, I live in a subdivision. My home is aligned with my neighbor's home, right next door, to within 1/8 of an inch. And my home, I measured the foundations. It's aligned within the sidewalk in front of my house to 1/8 of an inch. So, I don't know what the significance is of that. It's a street with houses. And maybe the original builders of the Great Pyramid felt that the alignment of the pyramid itself had no significance. So if you have no significance, you just make it square to the world, if you will, and just plop it on there, and there it is. So I wouldn't assign any esoteric significance to its alignment, certainly because there's no evidence to indicate that there was any significant importance to how it was aligned.
Mm-hmm. Well, I've read that the Great Pyramid, it has it's the only pyramid with that's an 8-sided pyramid in Egypt. And if this is true, can you explain what that means?
Yes. Yeah, like I explained before, the 8 sides are because each of the 4 sides, if you will, are divided in 2 from the capstone all the way down to the base, right down the middle. And those 4 sides or 8 sides are kind of bent in, and that resists the hydrostatic force inside the Great Pyramid during construction when it was being built. The force of the water inside the pyramid would push against those 8 sides and push them into compression and make it quite strong. Stones that are forced into compression are strong, but stones that are forced to kind of bend, if you will, that's not strong for stones. So it was a construction feature that was used in the Great Pyramid to make the sides even stronger than they would have been without that feature.
Mm-hmm. Wow. So, what significance did the value of pi? What was the purpose of it in the construction of the Great Pyramid?
Well, there are people that fiddle with the measurements and that type of thing of the Great Pyramid and put a lot of energy and value into like different measurements and everything. But there's not really much in the Great Pyramid that is round or rounded. So, pi, its significance is debatable. It's a number that somebody fiddling with the numbers came up with on the Great Pyramid's dimensions. But, a number doesn't move stones, and doesn't really do anything. And if you have the number pi somewhere in the Great Pyramid, it doesn't really help anything or do anything. Certainly, I don't think that the builders built the Great Pyramid to tell us that they knew pi. That would be a pretty small return on investment, I would think.
Okay.
All right. Well, is there a celestial connection between the Great Pyramid? I mean, how does the sun correlate into the mass of the Great Pyramid?
The sun?
Yes.
Is that what you said?
Yes.
I would say that the sun, well, first of all, everything has math. You know, the pencil on my desk, it has math. And it's round, so it exhibits pi and everything. And my kid has a bicycle with two round wheels. And, you know, the wheels don't really represent pi or the underworld and the before death or after. You know, it's a bicycle. You know, everything has math. The Great Pyramid has math, if you will. The Hoover Dam has math. Battleships and submarines have math. But I don't see any relationship between the sun and a pile of rocks. I don't know what it does or anything. So some people say that the Great Pyramid was a solar collector of some type, but I wouldn't think that is correct.
Okay. Well, if the Great Coffin wasn't meant to house the remains of the pharaoh, then what was its purpose?
The coffer in the king's chamber? Is that what you're asking?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, there is a stone box. I've sat in it, laid down in it, and just like everybody else since Napoleon. And it's a wonderful box made out of a single stone, all carved out, big enough for someone to lay down in, but so is a refrigerator box is big enough for someone to lay down in. That doesn't determine that that's what it's for. But we think that the coffer in the king's chamber was part of a float system, that water that traveled through the passages and chambers into the king's chamber was required a float to keep the water level from getting too high, similar to a float in a carburetor or similar to a float even in a toilet. The coffer was part of that mechanism which kept the king's chamber from becoming waterlogged, or the air chamber would become smaller and smaller because air is soluble in water. So it was part of a mechanism that would allow air to be reintroduced into the king's chamber, and the coffer provided feedback for that system, which is described in my book, The Great Pyramid Prosperity Machine, in greater detail. So that's what the coffer was for.
Mm-hmm. So what exactly is inside the Great Pyramid?
Right now, the only thing that's in there is the coffer. But there is speculation that the Queen's Chamber may have had a coffer as well. And that's based on some very early Arab writings that describe that it may have had a coffer. Also, some people say that the coffer had a lid because there's some features of the coffer that indicate that something was connected to it. But other than that, there's no furniture, no treasure, or anything in the Great Pyramid at all. It's devoid of any of anything that can be taken away. You know, people for 1,000 years have been scavenging the Giza Plateau, and if they could find something that they could trade for a goat, then they would take it and do it. So everything is gone. The Grand Gallery has some pairs of slots along the base of the Grand Gallery. That's that long passage that goes up at an angle, and various researchers feel that those slots had different purposes depending on the researchers. But there's no treasure ever found in the Great Pyramid that was known of, no gold or mummies or anything. So it is completely bare except for the coffer. And
So
the reason why the coffer is still there is that it is bigger than the passage to take it out. If that coffer wasn't, it would have been gone 1,000 years ago. So the coffer was set into the chamber before the sealing stones were set in place, which is quite interesting to me.
Yeah. So they built it around it. So are there any I can't even say it now. Hieroglyphs?
There are there is some writing inside the Great Pyramid, and there is no formal hieroglyphs inside the Great Pyramid or outside the Great Pyramid that we know of. Herodotus said that on the casing stones there was more writing than could ever be read, and probably that was graffiti. But those casing stones have been removed. There are some informal markings on some of the chambers above the king's chamber that are quite famous. And there are two cartouches, if you will. Cartouche is the symbol for a pharaoh. But those are markings, which are more like quarry markings that workers would have made, quite controversial. It's speculated that Howard Vyse, V-Y-S-E, who worked with Sir Flanders Petrie back in the 1830s, forged those markings for additional funding. You know, like he found something and then he would get additional funding. So the informal markings are quite controversial, and then there's some other like graffiti markings in the chambers above the king's chamber. They're small, inaccessible chambers. But do you want to know why there's no markings inside the Great Pyramid?
Because there's water in it?
Right. It's a machine. You don't need markings in it. Everything else in the Valley of the Nile has got writing all over it. The columns, the walls, inside, outside, everything. The Valley of the Kings, all those tombs, which aren't in pyramids, they're in holes in the ground. They've got markings and writings and hieroglyphs all over them. But the Great Pyramid doesn't, because it's a machine. The cylinders in the engine of your car don't have writing in them. There might be a part number for something, but you don't need writing. They didn't need, all the pictographs, stars, or all of that stuff, or anything depicting battles, or whose pyramid it was, or anything in the passages and chambers. There are no writing because it's a machine.
Well, that makes sense.
It does.
So why was Isaac Newton so interested in the Great Pyramid?
Okay, that's an exciting question. The reason why Isaac Newton was interested in the Great Pyramid, and he wrote a lot about the Great Pyramid, was that he felt that there was some sort of an association between the Great Pyramid and the Holy Bible. Isaac Newton wrote a lot about the Book of Revelation, Book of Daniel, and the Great Pyramid. And a lot of it was associated with Bible prophecy. And it's so much that even I haven't read it all. So, but he was quite interested in it in terms of very esoteric understanding of the Great Pyramid, and that is called the relationship between the Great Pyramid and the Holy Bible is called pyramidology. That's the name of that study, and it's about the correlations between the Great Pyramid and the Bible, like the 144,000 stones. Well, the Bible has 144,000 in it, so oh boy, there you go. And then they had the pyramid inch, this inch that they come up with they determined that the pyramid inch is a little different than British inch, if you want to call it that, the imperial inch. So then they measure the passages and the chambers with this unit of measure they come up with, and then it corresponds to Bible prophecy. There's websites galore about that, but that idea of pyramidology has sort of lost favor in modern times. A century ago, it was very popular, even up to the 50s, but it's lost favor now. But Sir Isaac Newton was very interested in the Great Pyramid, basically because of his idea that there was an association with the Great Pyramid and the Holy Bible.
All right. Well, what can you tell us about the hidden chamber and the strange metal plate artifacts and the wood discovered in the Great Pyramid?
Well, the metal plate was on one of the vents towards the outside of the Great Pyramid, and it is quite interesting, this metal plate. It is, I believe, I'm not sure where it is right now. It could be in the Petrie Museum over in England. I should know that, where it's at, but it may have been from a meteor, this small, it's like about 4 inches by 6 inches, this metal plate. It's the only metal in the Great Pyramid. And it was stuck in between some stones towards the outside near a vent. And it is also has a very fine layer of gold particles on it. It's rather old, but some say it may have been electroplated, but it's a mysterious plate, and it is very odd. There's pictures of it on the internet, of course, but it could have been anything. It's quite degraded through corrosion and everything, but it could have been anything like a trowel for applying the bonding agent to maybe something more significant than that. So it's hard to say what that metal plate was for.
Okay. So why do you think the Great Pyramid is so important to us today? I mean, how can the Great Pyramid help us in today's world?
Okay. It's important to a lot of people. There are people that think it's important because the Lord God Almighty was the architect of the Great Pyramid, and that the Great Pyramid confirms Bible prophecy. That's why some people think it's important. Not myself. I don't ascribe to that for a lot of reasons. Other people think the Great Pyramid is important, Egyptologists, because it was a tomb for a pharaoh and blah, 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 blah. The people in Egypt think it's important because it's a moneymaker. People go there and, travel to Egypt to go see it, and it generates a lot of money. And other people think the Great Pyramid is important because they can go inside and chant and do like religious, if you will, pagan ceremonies and wear white robes and contemplate their navel. I mean, I'm serious. That's why they think it's important. Well, why I think it's important is that the Great Pyramid was a machine that uses technology that we don't use to pump water. It was an efficient water pumping device. And it is, if that technology that they had could be redeveloped in modern times, then that would give us an alternative to oil. A cheap and clean method to pump water is a cheap and clean method to generate electricity. It doesn't have to be environmentally damaging like even hydroelectric dams are, and it won't be polluting like oil is. I know the Gulf Coast area with that big oil spill they had a few years ago. Oh my, how did we get into such a situation where we have to do that to the earth just so we can buy gasoline so we can move around? I mean, how did we get to this method? I mean, it's an excellent method, using oil, for the people that make the money off of it. But we need alternatives, and the Great Pyramid is ancient, high technology that's both efficient and environmentally friendly. And I don't think that everyone has to have a big stone pyramid, but that technology can be redeveloped and use like PVC pipe and polypropylene containers and some fittings that you can get at Home Depot, and redevelop this ancient technology that I describe how the pump works in my second book. So they could be either made locally or by cottage industry, and use this technology to make marginal farmland more productive, because the cost of irrigation is very high in most of the world. In, like, let's say Africa, they can't afford to buy a hydroelectric dam for irrigation, and they can't afford to buy fossil fuel-powered irrigation pumps to irrigate. So what do? They have empty bellies. But the people in the Nile Valley, they had full bellies. They built this huge infrastructure, like we build huge hydroelectric dams, for unbelievable prosperity. That's the difference between us and 200 years ago, is our infrastructure, our roads, our hydroelectric dams, our power grids, and that type of thing. So, and our communication infrastructure. So I think that's what I think. The Great Pyramid is still important today. It's not just a dusty pile of rocks to go look at, but it is something to be understood and to be developed to help our modern but very troubled world.
Right.
That's so true. And speaking of your books, what inspired you to start writing? And could you give everybody, a little information about your books, how they can get them and where to get them? And because we're running a little low on time, and I want to hurry up and I want to give you an opportunity to get that out.
Okay, great. Yeah, I just enjoy technology, and I see the Great Pyramid as a technological device, obviously, instead of like a tomb or something like that. And started this nonprofit foundation, and I hope people find out more about it at our website, thepump.org, where you can see both of my books about the Great Pyramid. Lost Technologies of the Great Pyramid is the first one, and the Great Pyramid Prosperity Machine is the second one. Those books are available as softcover or Kindle ebooks. They're also available on Amazon Prime. If you have Amazon Prime, you can download them for free. So that's nice. And we also finished a DVD documentary about how the Great Pyramid was assembled. We are finishing up our second DVD documentary about how the Great Pyramid passages and chambers operated as a water pump. So that's a very fascinating subject. Both of those subjects are very visual. So the DVDs are, in fact, kind of complementary to my books. First DVD with the first book and that type of thing. There's a couple of ways people can help our nonprofit foundation. They can like us on Facebook. That would be Facebook/Stephen Myers Author is a Facebook site. They could do that. They could tell other people about our website. We have a fundraising campaign, crowdfunding for a 3D printer. We're about halfway there on the funding goal. So if people are interested in contributing in that regard, all donations are tax deductible. We need a 3D printer for our research facility here in southwestern Oregon. And also, there's one other thing. Oh, yes, another way people can help us is we need to update our website. So if somebody out there is savvy with using developing a website, they can sure contact us and help us with our website, and they will get a link back to them for their gracious help in our website. So that's a little bit of information, and I hope people are interested and want to get involved.
Oh.
Awesome.
So how supportive is your family with all your research and work?
Well, I'm married. I've been married 36 years, and she hasn't left me yet. But it takes a lot of time. Like tonight, she looked at the back of my head while I'm talking on the phone, and my wife is very supportive of me. She's very tolerant. Let me put it that way. She ended up with a husband with an unusual passion, kind of a very different life quest than most people have, and but she helps a lot. She helps with the writing. She helps when I travel, that type of thing. And I couldn't do it without my wife. And the kids are all grown and gone and doing their thing, so they're supportive too in their way. So that's a great question, and I can't thank my wife Tammy enough for her help and tolerance.
Oh, that's so sweet. So, do you have any other hobbies besides your writing and the Great Pyramid, or any other hobbies?
Oh yeah, I like I say, I collect antique gasoline engines, the one-lunger type. I have several of those. I also am interested in 1/8 scale trains. The track is 7.5 inches across, big enough that you can ride on. So I'm in our shop that we have. I'm doing the welding and all of that to build a train, gas-powered train, and I'll have enough cars that I can pull the grandkids around. So I have hobbies like that. Also, amateur radio. I'm a licensed ham radio operator, and that's another hobby. And also traveling. We have a small motorhome, and we travel around the United States just to see our great and wonderful country. So there's a lot going on, and I keep busy.
I'll say it sounds like it.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, how do you work for a university with your research, or how do you get your funding? I know that's probably a off-the-wall question to be asking, but
no, I've told you to ask me any question you want. No, we don't work with a university, and they don't work with us. So we're independent researchers following a direction of research that most people don't follow. They just think, they used a big ramp, and that's good enough for them. And they used hand chisels, that's good enough. But we're following the technical aspects of this 45-story construction project. And we're funded through just a few, corporations. We've had some donations, both funding but also equipment, which is just as valuable as funding. But most of it is online donations and some local people donating materials and some tooling. So we're a pretty small outfit, but we have some lofty goals with redeveloping the ancient technology used associated with the Great Pyramid. So we, any type of funding contributions, we had some computer equipment like a printer and that type of thing. And certainly our computer is getting older. If someone wants to donate a computer, that would be wonderful, or they can contact us and find out how they can get involved in that regard. So that's how we're funded. And, I'm certainly not, I'm not a multimillionaire on this, but we're selling some books. We are pursuing our research, which is what I'm interested in, and things are good. Things are very good right now.
That's great. That's great. So do you have any other special plans that you're working on for 2017?
Yes. Our major goal is finishing our second DVD documentary, and that hopefully will be done in a few months, maybe four months. We have some post-production work to do, some computer-generated animations, and that type of thing. And then we will make that available on Amazon.com, and then we're going to make both DVDs available for, what do they call it, streaming videos, so they can just, it's cheaper that way for the customer, and just a few dollars, and they can stream the documentary. And we are certainly pursuing research and development experimentation at our research facility here in southwestern Oregon. And hopefully we can get another trip to Egypt figured out. Funding for that's been a struggle. But if we can do an additional trip somehow to Egypt, that would be great. And things like that. There's a lot of irons in the fire. I've written a number of magazine articles and continue to do that, and also appearing on wonderful shows like yours. So that's what we're doing.
Oh, thank you. Well, that's great. Well, I won't take up no more of your time, and I do appreciate you coming on the show, and I've learned so much. I love researching, especially, the Great Pyramid, and people like you just doing this type of research. It just blows my mind.
Well, great. And everyone seems to be interested in the Great Pyramid. So I appreciate your interest, and I really thank you for having me on your show.
Oh,
we'll
thank you so much.
Okay, goodbye now.
Okay, you have a good night, sir.
Have a great evening.
Okay, and I thank both of you.
Oh, thank you, sir. Well, that's it for us tonight. I want to thank Stephen Myers for coming on the show, and thank everyone who took the time to listen in. I'd like to give a big shout out to the Vibe Network, also to the first responders and our men and women in armed services. Thank you all for your service. Our guest for next Thursday night, February 16th, will be Steve Long. Steve is a researcher in magnetricity and hidden technology. So turn in next week to another exciting show starting at 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Thanks again. Till next week, be safe, and everyone have a good night.
Night now.
Insurance-minded speeches from Geico.
It's a common expression, don't look a gift horse in the mouth. However, what if the horse's mouth is filled with useful insurance tools? This is the exact case with the Geico app. Yes, the app is free and therefore a gift horse. However, look inside the app and behold, emergency roadside assistance, digital ID cards, bill pay. Get the Geico app. Look it in the mouth, get amazing services. Thank you.